You're listening to the Catholic Accent Podcast. We discuss the acts that Jesus performed that stunned his disciples.
Great to be back, Jordan.
You don't know us by now, you're never getting to know us.
I'm Jordan Waco here with Father Hamilton and Father Pujol. We made it. We made it to 12.
It's been a long time coming, all these weeks of recording.
So Paul arrives in Rome.
So we're talking about storms and salvation.
Paul is shipwrecked, yet unshaken.
Clever title, Jordan.
Yeah.
Thanks. So he arrives in Rome, and what is the significance? Where are we? Tell me where we are in this.
First of all, Paul is in custody. So he's being transported to Rome for sentencing.
So there's a lot that goes on before he gets to Rome. There with the shipwreck and so forth. As they're on the seas, there's a nor'easter and essentially like a hurricane for a few days. And they're just being tossed around in this thing. So that would be Paul as well as the others that are there with him that are imprisoned, as well as the soldiers that are with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Imagine being in a hurricane on one of these ancient vessels.
It's not a fun journey for him. He is probably even less fun than the actual, sailors because he's a prisoner.
this wasn't like going on a princess cruise.
I was going to say,
or,
it's not the Royal Caribbean
or,
of your dreams.
even
It's not all inclusive.
not
for
a
him.
carnival
Yeah.
cruise.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, nobody wants to go on those these days.
But so yeah, there would have been a lot of suffering, and you're cold, you're
Seasickness.
wet, you're constantly
Well,
sick.
in his letters
Dysentery.
to Corinthians, he says that he was shipwrecked 3 times and spent a full day and night floating on the water. So he was shipwrecked. He's floating on the water. Who scoops him back up?
Not the Coast Guard.
So they rescued him, and then he just went back onto a boat.
Well, they had to continue the journey. As we're looking at these 3 shipwrecks of St. Paul, there's one that really stands out as the most famous shipwreck when he and the passengers wreck onto a sandbar, right?
Yeah, so Paul is being escorted at this point by Roman guards, and he's being taken with others, rounded up, and they're being taken to Rome to be judged there.
So Paul's in custody.
Paul's in custody. Yeah, he's not just freely sailing around at this point.
Yeah.
And so as they're going, there's a storm that kicks up, and it continues for a fair time, and they're throwing things over the ship walls, and they're trying to figure out how they can anchor themselves, and it's complete chaos. Paul is prophesying about how they will be okay, even though the ship will eventually be destroyed. And so as they spend these couple weeks kind of just out in the Adriatic and confused, eventually there's a celebration of the Eucharist by St. Paul.
On board.
The Mass, there. Mass on the seas, they're walking on water. And then from there...
Mass on cruise ships.
Yeah, after that, he was the first cruise ship chaplain.
Exactly.
But,
Patron saint of.
yeah, but after that, then that celebration of the Eucharist, they actually shipwreck into a sandbar, and then they find themselves on the island of Malta until eventually then they get things together, and then they're taken back to Rome. But the centurion, who's the leader of this entire crew that is imprisoning Paul and escorting him towards Rome, he so respects Paul and his ability to prophesy about things of the future and these signs and wonders that
And
we
he's
talked
probably
about.
grateful that his life was spared.
Right, that he spares the lives of the prisoners. At this time, it would have been common, if things are going poorly on a mission like that, you just kill all the prisoners and then
move
you
on.
move on. And so Paul saves other people's lives
Yeah.
for the time being by the great wonders worked through him.
Now, does he say to save the other prisoners and he will go with them, or why?
So in the midst of his troubles, he still continues to spread the gospel in the midst of a hostile world.
So the Acts of the Apostles ends in Rome, but how does the church then develop in Rome?
Well, you have a living apostle there who's there for a couple years before what becomes his eventual death. And so people start to form around that. And you can think of Paul already being a well-traveled man, that he has this great missionary tradition behind him at this point, all these stories and how God has provided for him. He continues to spread the gospel through charisma, right? Through his own life, how he's been victorious even over shipwreck, being stoned, kicked out of places, ridiculed, imprisoned. And so he's a living witness of the gospel.
To the gospel.
In Luke's gospel, he shows the movement of Jesus from Nazareth to Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
the center of the Jewish world. And then in the Acts of the Apostles, shows the movement of the church from Jerusalem to Rome, which is the center of the entire world. So what does that mean?
We see a transition from where Jesus was, which is around Jerusalem, Galilee, Judea, and so forth. Now, as the church continues to grow from its locus point there of Jerusalem, we have all these different communities that are set up by St. Paul, and now he's going towards Rome. Likewise, Peter will later find himself in Rome as well. And what we see there is they kind of have to go to the center of the world at that point. Jerusalem, of course, an important historic city for the Jewish people and so forth. But really at this time, who controls Jerusalem and these surrounding regions and areas? Well, the great empire of Rome. And so
and that's why Rome is known as caput mundi, the head of the world, because it's there where not only ancient times are held in such great esteem and where this ancient governance of ancient Rome was held, but now the church is governed there for the whole world.
So now I know you both have been to Rome, but you were just there, Father Chris.
I was.
So why is
Yeah,
Rome...
Father and I both made pilgrimages this year for the Jubilee, and then I had the opportunity to head back a couple weeks ago.
So why is Rome so special to you that you went right after you came back? You decide to...
Well, it's always a good time. There's no excuse needed to go to Rome. But for me, I think Rome represents to us the triumph of Christianity over the pagan world. So you have these ancient religions, even from Greece, that found their way to Rome, because as the empire spread, they took what was good, what they liked, and brought it back. But Rome really is home not only to us as Catholic Christians, but to these great apostles, Peter and Paul. And so everywhere you go in Rome, there's always images of Peter and Paul. They're the apostles of Rome. And Rome allows us to see the fruits of their labor, see the places of their martyrdom, see the tools of their martyrdom. We can see the change of St. Peter. We can see the change of St. Paul with St. Paul outside the walls. And we also, more importantly, can go to their tombs. And it's at their tombs where the church often says we go to the threshold of the apostles. And it's a great reminder that we too are to be sent. We are to be apostles to the world today.
And Rome was a city of power, of authority, and of victory. You think about the great triumphal arch of Constantine that's next to the Colosseum. You think of all the great monuments that are there. And so at the end of their lives, Paul and Peter bring the real savior of the world to Rome, which is Jesus, with them in the preaching of their message. Not the Roman emperor, that there's all this divine worship of the Roman emperor as a godlike figure, but the one true God, the true Son of God, which is Jesus, not Augustus or Caesar. And so what you see from there is that Rome is really the epicenter of everything. At this time, the landmass of Rome reaching to the east and to the west, it becomes the place from which they can spread the gospel, and then it goes out to the very far-reaching corners of the world, and you start seeing the planting of the seed of the gospel, not just in the Mediterranean region, but the whole way across up to England eventually, and the whole way over towards Asia and into the east.
And as it moved into Spain, and then with, the conquistadors and those great discoverers, they're bringing the faith with them. But in Rome too, I think what's so interesting is you see that worship of the Sol Invictus, the unconquered Son, replaced with the worship of the true Son of God. And so it's still this whole completion, right? So we have the completion happening from the Old Testament to the New Testament, and now we're even seeing in pagan worship it coming to a new understanding and replacement with true Christian worship and true worship of God. And you see that most perfectly in the different obelisks around Rome that were brought there from ancient Egypt. And they're covered in hieroglyphs and we would say Egyptian spells, whatever those may be. But now each and every one of them are topped with a cross to show that Christ's cross conquers all things.
And they would mark the most important stational churches of Rome, where people would make pilgrimage to Rome to see the ancient places of where St. Peter and Paul gave their lives, the spreading of the gospel by their blood. So Rome's so important for us because it just had this entire structure and system by which the word of God could spread through and then proliferate, multiply. And so it was really the best missionary effort possible that Paul and Peter could do, even though Paul, for example, as we're talking about, is brought there by Roman authorities to be judged there.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds us too, I think, that it's these difficulties that he faced, that Peter will face, and that all the early Christians will face in Rome, as many of them go to their deaths. You know, the Acts of the Apostles, as it's written, might end with their time in Rome, but the acts continue because Christians always are acting in the person and in the name of Christ.
Thanks for listening to the Catholic Accent Podcast. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe to our show. Any closing remarks?
Bye. As they say in Old
As they
Country.
say in Old Country.
We're wrecked.
Bye.
We're shipwrecked.